Welcome to another episode of the Being Human and Doing Psychotherapy podcast, where I'm trying to parse out what are all the humans that are behind the psychotherapeutic role and what is it the psychotherapeutic part in all of us. And tonight I'm joined by a wonderful and curious lady, Patricia Zurita. And I'm curious actually where this conversation is going to take us because she works with overachievers, overthinkers, and helps them to get unstuck from fear-based struggles and ineffective playing it safe actions so they can do what works, what matters, and what they care about. So let's just jump right in it. Hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me today. I'm super excited to chat with you.
So I always start this podcast a bit with your story. So what are some words that you identify yourself with?
Some words I identify myself with, or some struggles I identify myself with.
It can be both.
Well, I think if I have to choose some words that I identify myself with today, I will say vibratiousness, maybe. That's one word, vibratiousness. I think humbleness, I think that's important to me. It's something that it really speaks to my heart. And in terms of, I think, maybe some of the struggles that I relate to, definitely being an overachiever, having promised to do things right and perfectly. Yeah, I think those will be the words I related today in this moment.
Mm-hmm. And what is the overachiever? Where has that brought you? Where has that overachieving brought you? Because I really relate a lot with that. And actually, as I was thinking, how will I talk about this podcast? Actually, I had something that happened just this morning that I had a recapitulation of a year with a friend of mine that I'm working on the voice with, and she asked me, tell me, how do you think you did well? Give me your critical voice and give me your friendly voice. And the critical voice was, you're never going to get this. You're not going to sing the way you want. You're not going to get on stage. You're not, all these things. And I almost couldn't find the friendly voice. And then we started to talk about what is the difference between being analytical and giving constructive criticism as critique, not criticism. And where is the critique in us? And so how do you think about these things?
It's such a great moment. I think the way that I distinguish this, the voice that is helpful to us, the voice that it's giving us some advice and is telling us what we can do differently, what we have learned from a situation, what we have been avoid. I think in general captures learning of an experience. And then the voice that is a tough voice, it kind of repeats the same content, right? There is repetition, and there is nothing new that we're learning. So I think sometimes we confuse self-reflection with self-punishment. Because we think that, of course, when something goes wrong, when sometimes we say the wrong thing at the wrong time, there is a part of us that wants to learn from our mistakes, from our struggles. And we wonder, could I have done something differently? Could I have said something differently? So that's self-reflection, right? That's a part of us that wants to give us some advice. But then if I spend hours and hours, but I could have said, yes, why didn't I? What was I thinking? I really could have said this again. What's wrong with me? What really happens to me? Am I an idiot? Am I so stupid that I couldn't see? What's wrong with me? That is more like the tough voice, right? The inner critic that may show up. So self-reflection is different than self-punishment, because self-reflection, you learn. You identify what you could have done differently and you move on. Self-punishment, you keep torturing yourself over and over and over. Right? So I think that is a distinction, right? The self-punitive voice usually is very repetitive. There is no new learning. Actually, there is more criticism, right? And just very tough feedback that is giving you. So that would be one difference.
Mm-hmm. And in your journey, how did you work with the punitive voice, and what helped you um to kind of tame it, if that's the word?
Mm-hmm. That's such a great question. It's a very profound one. I think when I think about overachievers and overthinkers, behind all those efforts to do things right and perfectly, behind all that hustling, behind all that working hard and being a go-getter and a doer, there is also this feeling that we're never good enough, that no matter what we do, it's not enough and we could have done better. It's like you have one accomplishment and you don't even enjoy, you don't even celebrate yourself, and you're already thinking the next, right? And the next, because we're chasing something. So I think in my life at different times, I certainly have experienced that. I came to the States in 2001, if I recall correctly, and I'm immigrant, I'm a woman, I have an accent. I am also coming from a working class family. So for me, working hard and pushing is the norm, not the exception, right? Like I was raised to do that. And it was with time that I had to learn to relate to that urge to do more and more in a different way, in a more skillful way. In my case, using acceptance and commitment skills. So I think what happens is that for all doers, overachievers, and overthinkers is that behind all that, we have to ask ourselves, what are we really chasing? What are we really chasing? What's behind all this doing mode, right? Because sometimes we are doing things to protect ourselves from feeling like a failure, from feeling that we're not good enough. Sometimes we're doing things because we're chasing an outcome that we don't have control of. Because no matter how hard we work on things, we don't know how the outcome is going to be. Sometimes we're also chasing approval from others because we want to be seen in a particular way. In my case, at some point, I remember I wanted to be seen by the academicians, right? I wanted to be seen. The idea of being seen was very important to me. So I will do things to make sure they see my work. So I think there is that. I will encourage people to ask themselves, what are I really chasing, right? What's behind all this doing? Am I trying to protect myself from feeling not good enough? And in terms of how to deal with that, one of the things that we know these days with current behavioral science is that making room, opening up, making a space for all the negative stories that we have is a very courageous and a skillful move to make in our life versus trying to suppress it, judge it ourselves, or replace it. So in the past, if we think about this, maybe 30, 40 years ago, if I had a thought that says, I am not a good coach, I am not a good therapist, then at that time, pop psychology will have told me every time you have the thought, you have to think about something positive about you.
So yeah, speaking of the non-good enoughness, how do you actually then manage that instead of going into the pop psychology, think a good thought? What is the answer to I'm not a good therapist, or I'm not a good coach, I'm not doing this really good?
Well, for me, everything shifted when I started using acceptance and commitment skills. And I encourage people to try these skills and see how they work for them. But one of the things that we have learned is that if you try to replace the story, if you try to suppress the story, if you try to ignore the story, or if you fight the story, it actually gets bigger, right? Because to be human is to have self-doubt. To be human is have moments in which we second guess ourselves. To be human, it is having moments in which we feel that we're not good enough. However, what is important to remember is that having a thought doesn't mean that we have to be a puppet of a thought. Having a story that says that we're not good enough doesn't mean that we have to take action based on the story. Having the thought that says that I'm not a good coach, I'm not a good therapist, doesn't mean that I have to hold that as the absolute truth and a whole representation of who I am as a whole human being. having a story that says, I'm not good enough, I'm not a good partner, I am a lazy person, I'm not smart enough. It's all about to manage skillfully by making room for it, opening up, noticing when the story shows up. We know when our stories get activated, get triggered. And if you're willing to be playful, you can even name your story. You can say things like, here comes the not good enough story. Here comes that I am a lazy person story. Because at the end of the day, within acceptance and commitment therapy, we teach you 6 core psychological processes. One of them is called diffusion. That is all about creating a space between who you are and your thoughts. A space in which you can look and observe your thoughts as things, letters, words, and images put together, not as a reflections of your character, but as something the mind will always be doing. So given that we don't have control of our mind, we can choose how to respond to the noise that the mind comes up with. So when I am naming the story, when I'm noticing and naming the story, I am creating a little bit of a space. I don't have to, if my mind tells me, Patricia, you suck in this interview. Maybe Alexandra, thinks that you don't know, what you're talking about. Maybe she thinks that what type of coach is she? One way to handle the story will be to make sure, yeah, Alexandra, and am I doing okay, Alexandra? Is this okay? I will be checking with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the other option, if I'm using acceptance skills and diffusion skill, is noticing that the story is in the back of my mind. I may give it a name softly inside my head and say, here comes a not good enough story. And then checking that in this moment, in this conversation, it is important for me to be present with you. It is important for me to focus on what you're saying and do the best I can to teach some of these active skills. So notice how having the story that my mind comes up with doesn't have to be a dictator of my behaviors. I can have the story and I can choose how to respond to it based on my values. Now, I know that saying this may sound very simplistic. I know it's not easy, but what is important here is to remember that every time you know this and you name the story, if you're willing to be playful, you can give it all types of names. You are giving yourself the freedom to choose how to respond to all the insight noise that we have. And that's how our lives get joyful and richful. Because when we take those stories, the not good enough stories as the absolute truth, we do all types of things. We avoid, we over-prepare, we under-deliver. We never try something new because it may prove the story truth, right? Versus when you learn to make room for that story, you don't have to deny it. You don't have to like it. But you can simply say to yourself, here comes my story, the lazy story. Here comes my not so good enough story. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath. And then you can ask yourself, what's truly important to me in this moment? What truly matters right now? And do your best to take action based on what is important to you. The story may be in the background, but we're not feeding into the story by dwelling on it, by judging it, by wondering why the story is here. In fact, every time we do something we care about, of course, we should expect our not good enough stories showing up, right? Because that's what the mind does, right? Of course, every time we care about something, the mind will come with noise. It wouldn't be, the mind wouldn't be doing its job if it doesn't come up with a lot of thinking and thinking, minding and minding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the therapists I really like, she said, don't believe everything you think.
Yeah, that's a classic one. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, you may have heard there is this experiment from, I think, Wagner, the classic Wagner experiment from years ago, in which he asked participants in the research to not think of a white elephant, right? So then what happens, right? You automatically think about it, right? So those were the experiments that were showing how thought suppression quite limited, right? And think about this, every time, if I'm walking on the streets, or if you are preparing a research project, or you are in a session with a client and your mind pops up, you are not good enough. You start arguing back in your head. It's like you are playing like a mental game in your mind, because it's a matter, you cannot win with our mind. Our mind has thousands of thoughts a day, thousands of thoughts. right? So it's impossible that, we're going to win the mind, right? It actually take us much more effort to argue back with our mind. But choosing how we want to respond to the stories, that's what we have control of.
And I'm curious, you mentioned being an immigrant, being a woman, and all of those are your identities. And I'm curious, what are the stories that came with those identities that you needed to recognize as not yours, really?
That's such a profound question. Well, I think that took me a while, actually, because, I'm also, working class kid, right? I think when you're a working class family in South America, where I'm coming from, you know that you have to work hard and hard, because working hard, will pay back later on, right? It has benefits. So I grew up with that. It has worked in my life in many incredible ways, and other times it hasn't. But at some point, what was going on is that as I was building my career, and this is years ago, my passion was always in anxiety-based struggles, some fear-based struggles, right? That's where I have my niche, my expertise. I think dealing skillfully with fear is the skill of the 21st century. I think in the information era, our fears not travel in isolation, but they travel in clusters. I think to be human is to be afraid. And if we don't manage fear or anxiety skillfully, it completely narrows our lives. And it takes us farther away from who we want to be. So my passion has been always there. But when I was, trying to do things professionally, I would quickly be boxed in all types of things. Because I'm immigrant, there is this expectation that she'll only work with immigrants. Or because I am Latino, that I should have that expertise. And I think of culture in a much more broader way, right? So it was, I think, a tricky part, right? Because many things were coming my way as long as I will do things that people will want me to do. So I have to, say it was hard also because, of course, that I was scared of judgment, right, by my own community, right? Like, how come she doesn't want to work with Latino people, right? And it's not I didn't want it; I just didn't want to be boxed, right? I think it's just when you have an accent, when you walk into a room, your accent is the first thing people will pick up, right? And people have all types of projections. You are this, you are that. And it's hard to feel seen beyond that projection at times, right? We know when people get us. We know when people are just keeping things here. Like, no matter who we are, like, I'm actually the worst representation of the Latino crowd, right? Like, my eating habits, my exercising habits are very different. In some way, many parts of me are very Latino. Others are just different. But in that process, I think career-wise, I was working super hard to be seen in an environment that was very hierarchical, an environment in which it was also quite cliquey, right? You have to be in the group, right? You have to be this exclusive part. And I was working really hard because I wanted this crowd to acknowledge my work. And I keep getting rejected, or I keep getting, if you want to in, you have to do this, right? So it was very conditional. It wasn't actually very open. And I remember that one time I was very vocal about how I think that there is a structure of power, right? That is not the certain positions or openings are not given because of merits or qualifications, but because of cliquiness. So as you can imagine, that didn't land well, right? That didn't land well at all. But I still got rejected. I still, and it was, this is on the past. This is like maybe 15 years ago, right? But it was the time when actually it hurt so badly. I was like so disappointed that no matter how many books I published, no matter how successful was my career, no matter how research papers I have done, I wasn't given the space. And I was just, how is it possible? And I was so hurt. And of course, using active skills, I asked myself over and over, what really hurts here? What really hurts here? Why is it hurting me so much, right? And then I asked myself, what's behind my hurt? What's my value? right? It hurts me so much in direction, but why? What's the part that really is affected here? And if we think about your hurt as one side of the coin, then the question is, on the other side, what's the value? What's the thing that I care about that I am suffering because of that? And then I realized that my value is definitely to disseminate act skills, because I think they can be very transformative in our own growth, in our own development as human beings. And that I exclusively want to teach act skills for people struggling with overthinking or anxiety problems. So that was very crystal clear. And then from then I realized, if that's the value, what else can you do that is not trying to prove yourself to a crowd that doesn't have a space for you, right? And then I started doing my newsletter, my own resources, my own webinars. And what I can tell you, this is, I don't know, 14, 15 years later, is that it was painful, yes, to experience that rejection, but also to notice that I was trapped in the story, right? But it has been so liberating to start actually focus more on the value, doing what is under my control. It has been much more revitalizing, right? And then little by little, what has happened is that incredible sweet opportunities came my way. Many connections like this one start happening, right? I became perhaps more bold into approaching certain things, right? And I realized that that when we learn to check what we're really chasing, when we learn to really unpack what's the value behind our hurts and our fears, and then when we could choose actions based on what matters, life gets richer. Like, to me, it was one of those moments in which I haven't tried ever again. I haven't done anything, with the agenda. I want these people to be seen. I want them to get the space. These days, if they give me the space, cool. If no, fine, right? Like, I think, but it doesn't. It's different. It has really psychologically given much more freedom and much more energy to do things that are important. So I think that's what I learned for me to navigate the story, right? That my behavior with the story was really trying to prove myself to a crowd that wasn't interested in me. They were doing lip service. They didn't have the space. And that didn't change then, right? But if I have continued pursuing and proving myself, then I will have become a cranky woman, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, because as you were speaking, I thought, like, by contacting me, you've given yourself the space as well. And I thought that was a wonderful thing, because it is so important to say, this is what I care about. Would you want to talk about that? Because often there are people who will do that. There are people who are interested in our stories. And it's just about also us being able to reach out and say, I really care about this. This is my value. Do you share it? And be okay with also accepting that rejection of people. Well, I don't share it, but I might know someone who does, or I might not. Then you try another door. But I guess it's not something we are conditioned to do, because we are born into systems which we think we need to fit in and fall into, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, that's beautiful said. Yes.
And I think you mentioned power, and I wonder, how did your relation to power change since you took your power back?
That's a great question. I think it certainly has maybe much more aware of our interaction with our inner world and the context in which we live in, right? I think definitely there is some structures of power that we are all part of. I think what I can say is that acting more in what is really important to me and my values has given in some way power to do what really revitalizes and engages me, right? And also has made me, much more forgiving of myself, right? I think, I keep, it's a little funny, but every time I do some outreach or I submit a proposal for this and that, I keep a file of what gets acceptable, what's not. The number of rejections keeps growing, right? 200, 300, right? Because that's the game, right? But when I look at that, right, what comes is the sense of always asking, is it worth it to ask again? Is it worth it to move on? And we have to give ourselves permission to move on. Sometimes pursuing is the right thing to do. Sometimes letting things go is also the right thing to do. And we have to learn to distinguish that. And I think that in some way gives us the power to be our authentic selves, not the ideal self that we would like to be or to live this ideal life, but to really make room for who we are in the context of where we're living. And that can be so refreshing and so engaging and revitalizing that that it really keep us going, right? It's like the quality is very different.
And I'm curious also about the woman role and womanhood and being in hierarchical structures, and how did you get in touch with that part? How did you, if you have somehow reframed what it means for you to be a woman beyond the stories that are given to you, especially I think in what I imagine to be a very patriarchal society where you're coming from?
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a juicy question. I think we can go hours talking about it. So we'll try to give you like an abbreviated response here. I think it's a very, very rich question. I think it is impossible not to be a woman without carrying a story, right? It's impossible to be a woman without carrying a story of how women have been conditioning, how women have been socialized, what is expected from a woman. I think it's impossible, and we will be blind if we don't acknowledge that shaping has happened, whether we see it or not, right? And at the same time, I think for me, understanding more my role as a woman perhaps has happened definitely more on the States than in South America. When I came to the States, the experience of being the other, right? To have the otherness that has been very, very, very clear. Like I never knew I was a person of color in Bolivia, right? Like never thought I was a person of color. Never, I would say that. I never had a green card that I say, or a passport that said I was an alien, right? Like all that happened in the States, right? So all that's like, what is this, right? But also the hardest experience has been certainly within academia, that is at that time very, very male structure, very male dominant, very male organized, and trying to fit in those roles. It's not easy. It's absolutely not easy. So I have a lot of respect for women in academia. Times have changed yet, but we're dealing with a very, I think, old institution of hierarchy. So I think for me, it was on those contexts that I realized that the question was, how can I be authentic to myself? How can I keep the feminine aspects of who I am, while I also do what is skillful and assertive in a context that is very male dominant? And one of the things that happens is that there's one time I remember I was in a training clinic, and I had a meeting with like 5 guys, type A personalities, very dominant, very, very out there, right? And I remember that as they were talking, I realized that the only way to be listened to is to just be as assertive as they were and as loud as they were. So I wasn't shy about that, right? Because I knew that if I will go, it's a tricky situation. I wasn't betraying myself, but to be here, you have to do what is skillful without losing yourself, right? I think by nature, I'm very direct and very straightforward. But I remember that meeting, observing the dynamics. And then I realized that for me to ask for what I needed and to get things done, I needed to be very, very clear and very consistent and very loud at times, and to not be shy about that, to not be shy about asking, to not be second guessing, or to not be over apologetic. I'm so sorry, I don't mean to bother you, right? No, I think I learned in a very unique way that you can be authentic with your feminine side, with the side of your behaviors that are, consistent with being a woman. And you also can be skillful to operate in the environment you are. Right. I think that is, to me, that was very important, right? we adapt, right? If I would have been over apologetic, asking the things, or we like, I don't mean to bother you, right? I don't think that would have go anywhere, right? Not ideal, right? But I think we have to learn to just stay authentic to ourselves while also being assertive to what the context requires from us. So I think that was interesting, and these days, as many things have happened in terms of women's rights and access for women into different social spheres, I feel very, I think, grateful that we're living a time in which the narrative's changing. I cannot imagine being a woman, like, trying to work 60, 70 years ago. I just, when I read the stories, when we watch movies, it's quite shocking. So I think that as perhaps things are changing at a slow pace, but I'm grateful they are changing, and that we are part of that we are part of changing a narrative that these days, I think there is a space. And I remember Meghan Markle, she gave a speech a couple of years ago, and I quoted this in one of my blog articles because it was very moving. She said, women need to be invited to the dinner table. And if they don't get invited, they need to set up their own dinner table. And to me, that quote in some ways reflects, what many of us, including you and myself and many other women, are doing. We're creating the new, right, for ourselves based on what is important to us. So I think that in that sense, that is being authentic to ourselves and to who we are, what holding all the pieces of what it means to be a woman and still doing what is skillful in a given context.
It's interesting because I'm a woman in academia, very aware of what is happening, and it is definitely a really challenging skill to learn how to authentically, humanely express my vulnerability, and also bring the assertiveness necessary for that vulnerability not to be damaged and unseen. But it is a very, very, very challenging, and I feel, although I know it's changing at a very slow pace, I think this painting says a lot about how I feel at times.
Yes.
Which is that there is still times where I feel deeply enraged that actually even had to be the case. But I do agree that it is important to then notice what our values are and work around with people who share those values and not constantly go towards people who obviously don't.
Yeah, if I can respond a little bit, I hear you. I can see the painting, it has this very strong red, right? And I relate to your painting, the moments of rage, of the unfairness, the unfairness that, again, I think in my experience, it is not a system of meritocracy, of merits and qualifications. It's a system of cliqueness. And that will still get me, and I can go hours ruminating. Yes, I think we still have moments like that. But in moments like that, I think what is important for people listening to us is to really acknowledge that we feel what we feel. It doesn't make us bad people. It doesn't make us angry women. It doesn't make us angry. We feel what we feel. There is no need to judge ourselves, right? What is important sometimes is just openly acknowledge, this is what I'm feeling. I am sensing this in my body. This is how much it hurts. Make room for that pain without suppressing, deny it, without judging ourselves. And then really, once again, ask ourselves, why does it hurt? What's behind this? What's the value? Right? What's the value behind this pain? And what can I do about it that is under my control? Because I think that in life, there are going to be many more moments for all of us, many, many more moments in which we are going to witness unfair situations, when things are going to happen at us. And I think it's easy at times to judge ourselves because we don't want to be these angry women, right? We don't want to be seen as that. Then we judge ourselves, right? But reality is that if we judge ourselves for what we feel, we're adding more pain. So within ACT, right, I think there's this beautiful skill of acceptance, of making room, opening up to the feeling without judging, without denying, but we really full curiosity, how it shows up in your body. What is the feeling telling you to do? What is the action urge that is coming? Where do you know this? Is it moving? You can even imagine the feeling as something that has a color, a texture, a temperature. And then you always want to ask, what is the action urge? What is the action this feeling wants me to take? And instead of acting on it quickly, you may want to ask, if I do what the feeling tells me to do, will that help me to be who I want to be in this moment, or does it take me further away? Right? All those things, really lead us to be psychologically flexible in the time that we're living and in the context that we get exposed to.
And how do you make that space in between to actually check in with what is it that I'm feeling and how do you get to that value? It's something that I'm sitting with and I'm trying to understand what is it that gets me so much? What is it that I think is so wrong here that is kind of, you said, unfair, painful? And I am also sitting with a question of really that. What is it that I would love to communicate back? But it's somehow not coming. And I'm wondering, how is it that, what's your process and how did ACT or other skills that you've learned as a therapist helped you to do that?
That's a great question. I can tell you one of the things that happens with frustration or with anger or disappointment is that sometimes our minds as a content generating machines, our minds as dynamic entities, we know that they have a life in their own. And our mind sometimes go into overthinking mode about the past, the future, past failures, or doubting things or second guessing things. But our minds also come up with rules. In ACT, we talk about ruling thoughts. There are different types of rules that our mind holds on to, and rules are like the classic ought, should, must, always, never. But they're also more, sometimes our preferences, we may say that they're preference, but we relate to them as rules because a preference has been broken. So sometimes we get disappointed, we get hurt because one of our rules, one of our expectations has been broken. Someone has treated us in a way that we didn't want to be treated, and that's wrong. They shouldn't do that, right? So sometimes it's that we have to check, is there like a ruling thought here that makes me disappointed? That will be one way, because sometimes we get stuck in how things supposed to be according to our mind, not how things are. Very human, very human. I have many moments like that. Why do you have two types of fonts on the document? Everyone should check that. Don't send me that, hurts my eyes, right? So sometimes our mind gets hooked onto rules and we get very disappointed because people break our rules, our standards. In the case of perfectionism, of overachievers, right? But the other aspect is that to tap into our values, sometimes you're right, it's hard to tap into that because there is, a lot of noise, inside noise, right? Sometimes it's helpful to do other types of values exploration exercises, like you may want to ask yourself, if I only have 24 hours to live tomorrow, that's all what I have for things that happen in life. I only have 24 hours. How will I spend my time? What will I be doing? And what's so special about that activity? What's so special about hanging out with that friend or my significant other? How do I want to show up to them? How do I want to be remembered by them? So that's one values exercise. You may also want to imagine that people are celebrating your 80th birthday and you have your best friends, your significant others, your relatives, and each one of them is given a speech, like a speech about what you stand up for on life, what mattered to you. And then you check, okay, my best friend I would like my best friend to say this, I would like my partner to say this, I would like my co-worker to say this. That also helps you to get in touch with your values. And then you may want to ask yourself, am I living those values or not? And is this heard in some way connected to any of these values? So that would be the other thing. In the moment, there's another values exploration exercise, and there are many of them. These are just two that I can share right now. There's another, what I can say also, in the moment of hurt, right? When we ask ourselves, what really hurt about this? Is my mind holding to a ruling thought? What really, really hurts? What was so important for me about getting a yes about this activity? what was so important for me about getting yes to this research design? What was so important for me to get yes for this budget, right? Why did I care about that so much? And then you may want to tap in your values. I think I relate what you're saying, that I know sometimes I have to ask myself, multiple times. I have journal about, what really hurts about this, because I couldn't understand my pain, right? I think I have to journal about trying to see what really hurt, right? What hurts so much about being told no. So that could be one way. And these other values-based exploration exercises too, they give you a perspective, right? Because sometimes we get trapped into the mind, right? Really thinking about, if I only have 24 hours, if people that love me, I celebrate an 80th birthday. Or sometimes, another values-based exercise is, imagine that you're writing your own epitaph, for your tombstone, right? And here lies Patricia. She was very busy getting cranky at everything, right? So then I will want to think about, okay, what will I like to write? Well, if I think about my tombstone, what will I write? And then you can even write on the paper. Here lies Patricia.
Can you reply to that for yourself? What is it that you would like to have in your epitaph?
Today, I will say that she committed her life to spread actor skills to the world. That became her life mission. That she also was trying to live with curiosity for anything that came her way. That she was curious to try new things, to connect with new people. That she showed to the ones that she loved constant caring. Her love and her caring, it wasn't based on the feelings or the moods or the thoughts. Like, she showed to others with constant love. I think those are the three things. I think over the years, right, my eulogy has been shrinking. I think today is just these three things, right? Yeah. In the past, I have tortured myself wondering whether I have contributed or not to disseminate active skills, right? It was like really a big thought in my head, like, that she really disseminated. These days, I give myself permission to know that I did my best. I continue doing my best, but that is not something that consumes me right now. So my eulogy is shrinking.
Okay.
What about you? If I can ask, what will be yours?
Yeah, I was thinking, I guess what came that is she lived courageously, curiously, and lovingly.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
So beautiful. You see, if I connect to that, sometimes one of the things that also has come to me within ACT, and I have been trying this the last maybe 3-4 years, I do a life audit. I do a values-based audit in my life. It's in my calendar every 3 months, right? There is just like 2 hours I block to check how am I really living my life. Because so much happens to us, we don't think about this every single day, right? But that is something I encourage people to do that. And I can send you a link of a template that I use. It's all values-based, in which really we're looking at what is a value, what are your values, you reflect on them, and then what are the blocks? And then the last part is like, what are you willing to think or feel and still take action? So you prepare yourself for the next 3 months. But the thing, this whole idea of doing life audits or values-based, reviews every 3 months keep us on check. And the other thing that I do, I cannot, I don't think I will be able to show you, but on the left side in my home office, I do have a whiteboard. And in the bottom of the whiteboard, I have 3 areas of my life that are very important. I have relationships, career, and personal growth. And at the end of every week, there is a little line next to it. One end of the line is very close and the other one is very far away. And then I put an X. So at the end of every week, I check, okay, was I close? Was I far away? So doing this check, this is very simple, right? So it's not something that takes me more than 10 minutes, right? It's literally just 3 lines and the little names of the areas in my life. And I just put a little mark where it corresponds. Sometimes I'm close in some areas, sometimes I'm far. But I fundamentally believe in creating moments of reset, especially when you're a doer, right? Rest, it helps us to do things more consistently. And creating these micro forms in which we are checking really how we're living life, right? We check all types of things in life. So what about checking how close we're being to be who we want to be in the areas that matter?
Mm. And so just to respect your time, I want to ask you, is there something that I haven't asked, but you feel like a burning desire to say that is close to your values? Because we spoke a lot about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I was thinking, let me think. There's one tiny micro skill here that I encountered a lot in the work, and I certainly in my life. For people listening to us who are prone to do things right and perfectly, and they may go into perfectionistic behaviors or procrastinating behaviors. I encourage them to listen to the first part of our conversation. We talk about more acceptance, how we can make room for these stories, how we can notice and name those stories. But also one very common area of stagnancy is decision making. And the micro skill I encourage people to try is asking them, when they have to make a decision, they're dwelling on it, asking themselves whether they have to satisfy the decision or maximize the decision. Maximize is try to make the best decision all the time, whether you're going to buy socks, a coffee machine, a laptop, it has to be the best. You spend hours researching for information, right? You need to know every single thing out there. Satisfies just make a decision with what is enough, and they know that they will figure out if something goes off. In life, a lot of things require that we satisfy some decisions and we maximize few of them. So if people feel stuck making a decision, check what your decision style. Are you trying to maximize the decision or satisfy? So that would be, because I think that is really, really hard. We think that it's just like a tiny thing, but people really get stuck making choices, not just about big things, but, day-to-day life stuff. So that would be my last thing.
Mm-hmm. And I like to ask a few rapid fire questions. One of them is, what is an absurd thing about you that not many people know about?
When I was a kid, I thought that there were people living inside the radio. So we'll spend hours thinking, come on, little people, come on. And then when the ATM machines, came alive, right? I thought that there was an old man that was giving money to people, right? So I used to walk by the ATM machine and like, my goodness, I wonder if he takes breaks, right? I wonder if he celebrates holidays, right? Hi, Ma. I was just, Mom, we have to bring food for this person. This was working so much, right? Didn't understand what was technology behind that person there.
Nice. I love the answers to these questions. And what do you think has become more and what has become less important to you with age?
That's a beautiful question. I think being loving and caring has always been important in my life, and much more now that I'm aging, much, much more. I think we have a limited amount of time on this earth, and I want to live it loving and learning to love and preparing myself to love as much as I can. And what has become less is the struggle of forcing things that are just not meant to be. I think I am, I believe some things they happen organically. I think I have been getting perhaps more skillful to distinguish when pursuing is the right thing to do, when letting it go is also the right thing to do. I don't think I knew a difference that 20 years ago. So I think that has been, it's important, but it's really, I'm not just doing things for the sake of doing right now. So let's.
Mm-hmm. So you have come more to the being side rather than the doing one.
I think that's a beautiful way of saying yes. But we're big into the being side. Absolutely. Yes. Very, very big into that.
And the last one is there anything you want to ask me?
Yes. Well, I actually have many, many curiosities. What I would be curious, Alexandra, is today, as we're having this conversation, what moves you? What keeps you alive? What's the thing that today is just really important to your heart?
I don't know, like people's stories. I love listening to people's stories. I love listening to people's stories. I think I could sit for hours just listening. And I think that really moves me, that touches me, that fuels me. I think it's so important to go away from the averages that science is doing and really deeply listen to people's stories.
Beautiful. Well, I have to say that I think you have the gift to do that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, very
I'll
natural.
take that. I'll take that. Okay, so thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for the contact. I really enjoyed to be heard as well and seen, and I felt you have done that by contacting me. And thank you for really being willing to share all the skills you have.
You are very kind. Thank you so much for making the space, especially today. I'm very, very grateful. And I'm very, very much looking forward to staying connected. There may be a next
Absolutely.
track.
I'm sure there will be.
Thank you so much.